I think there's the type of people who will follow the IKEA directions step by step until it's done. And then there's the people who don't have the patience for the directions and they just want to start trying to put it together themselves. And so the way we thought about that was, and there's different opinions on this, but that's why we had the checklist.
Hey, I'm Corrina.
And I'm Taylor.
And this is Direct, a podcast we created to showcase the creativity and hard work of go-to-market teams everywhere.
We're here to share the stories and experiences of the hardworking, passionate individuals who make up go-to-market teams, the ones who truly make the magic happen.
Taylor and I have been fortunate enough to work side by side on some incredible projects together, and now we want to put a spotlight on the unsung heroes behind some of the best go-to-market campaigns out there.
In each episode, you'll hear from individual contributors who have gone above and beyond to make a difference. They'll share their challenges, victories, and the lessons they've learned along the way, all to help you unlock the next step in your career. Get ready to be inspired, learn something new, maybe even share a laugh or two.
Welcome to Direct. Welcome back to another episode of Direct with Corrina Taylor. I'm Corrina.
And I'm Taylor.
And today we're joined by Alfredo Salkeld. He is the brand director at Sinch. And when he's not working, you can find him spending time raising his 5 chickens. And as a certified beekeeper, he keeps himself pretty busy. Alfredo, I'm curious, do you have a particular brand or style of honey that you like to curate most? I know you can make some mead out of honey. You can just have regular old honey. You can have chapstick, you name it. Anything cool that you would want to do
With honey?
Yes.
I'm a sucker for hot honey. I'll put hot honey on pizza crust, on just about everything.
I love that. Do you actually make any hot honey yourself?
You know, I actually don't.
You should.
I'm hitting a point in my beekeeping career where I'm tired of harvesting honey. It's so much work. I almost just do it for the enjoyment of keeping the bees, and I let other beekeepers deal with the effort of actually harvesting the honey. So I've been buying honey from other beekeepers, which is weird considering I have my own bees.
Okay. I have seen it. My uncle actually used to be a beekeeper, and it's quite a feat. I mean, it's no joke. Just putting on the suit alone I was like, that's too much work for me.
Yeah, I like the keeping of the bees, the harvesting honey. It's just so sticky. I have a tactile thing where sticky textures drive me crazy. And so it's a weird fit to be a beekeeper who hates sticky things.
Well, we could talk about bees all day long. I would love to chat with you offline about my farm and all the animals we have here. But for today's episode, we're really excited to dive in with you about this program that you created, where you drove a lot of success for converting free trial users into paid users by creating a really strong self-service sort of onboarding. So can you set the stage for our listeners about sort of the genesis of this program and the problem you were solving?
So I was working at a company called SimpleTexting that's now owned by Sinch, the company I currently work at. And SimpleTexting is a B2B SMS messaging platform, specifically targeting SMBs. So this is small mom and pop businesses that need a way to be able to text their customers. And I joined there as a copywriter. I was the only marketer there. And then I grew into being a marketing manager, and we grew from 5 million in recurring revenue to 30 million over the course of 5 years. And I was tasked with coming up with how to onboard users. And specifically because we're targeting SMBs, right? These are people who are signing up for a $29 a month account. You can't afford to have a one-on-one call where you're demoing the product to each individual person. You're getting hundreds of signups, a week. You just can't do that when someone's on a 7-day free trial. So we needed a way for that onboarding to be self-serve. And what we landed on was a combination of in-app checklists, in-app flows, so guided tours, and then a series of onboarding emails.
How do you think about segmenting that experience for multiple personas as well? I figure that's something that could be a little bit daunting to get started when you're considering that.
I feel like this is where I made a big mistake. I think I overthought the fact that our product was horizontal, right? And I think sometimes I've never worked at a vertical SaaS company where it's we sell software to car washes. It's man, that must be so nice. You've got one type of customer. Whereas, simple texting, we had customers who ran churches. We had customers who, ran bars. It ran the gamut. And so one of the mistakes I made was personalizing for the sake of personalizing. And like you hear this a lot in marketing of like, personalize your headline, personalize your copy, and you'll see these extraordinary results. And so as a marketer of one, I way over engineered this, where I was like, they're going to come in, they're going to select their industry, and then their checklist is going to be personalized specifically with like benefits driven copy to that specific industry. And it was way too complicated and way too hard to maintain. Something would break. I'd log into the back end of our, flow builder. I'd have to look through like 50 different flows to figure out where did something break, where is data not getting passed. So the key was to zoom out and think about what are the jobs to be done in a generic sense. And ultimately, it came down to two things. Users just wanted to send texts to a large group of people, or they wanted to have back and forth conversations via text. Those were the two things. Now, what's the like benefit after that? That then varied by industry, right? If you're a restaurant who wants to send a text to a large group of people, you want to increase butts in chairs at your restaurant. Whereas if you're an HR manager sending out a text to a group of people, you want to make sure that people are getting the latest company policies, right? So like the benefit language changed, but that's not a good enough reason to overcomplicate the onboarding, especially when you're getting started, and have like a checklist that says reach all of your employees at once, and then another one for churches that says like reach all of your parishioners at once, right? Just changing the copy that little bit is not necessarily worth the extra effort and complication. That's one thing I learned building that out.
Well, I like that it's like you're giving something before you're asking for anything in return too. And I think anytime with content, whether that's in app or, on a brand's homepage website, it's so much better to not lead, I think, with assumption and instead just give you all the various ways you could use your product or application. And then maybe throughout their buyer's journey, then you can sprinkle in a little bit more of that personalization where maybe you say, hey, if you're a restaurant, click this template as an example. So I love that you kind of arrived at that approach. How did you find that you could get buy-in from broader teams here? Because you're definitely sounding like you're kind of a bootstrap marketer here. We came in, you're wearing a bunch of hats. How did you find that you were able to get the ball rolling to get some of this stuff actually implemented within the application itself?
I think number one, pointing to what customers are actually saying, right? So if I'm trying to get buy-in to the fact that, hey, we need to simplify our onboarding down to these two paths, send a text to a group of people or chat back and forth, like show them transcripts from show them transcripts from customer calls where users are actually saying that, where you ask them, why did you sign up? And they're saying, I needed to text a group of people. And eventually you see enough of that. Like, okay, it's hard to argue with a customer saying something. It's a lot easier to argue with like your opinion about something. So I always try to ground it in what are the users who are actually pulling out their credit card and paying for our product saying.
I think that is a really strong point that you've just made is like, first, know your audience and not doing the personalization for the sake of personalization, right? Listen to them and what they need in order to create these, especially for a scrappy team, these two direct paths. But from conversations we were having earlier, you also mentioned that, some users prefer to learn in different kind of ways. So could you elaborate on that as well? So you've got two paths for the group text versus the one-on-one conversations, but from there, different types of learners in your onboarding experience.
Yeah, I think there's the type of people who will follow the IKEA directions step by step until it's done. And then there's the people who don't have the patience for the directions and they just want to start trying to put it together themselves. And so the way we thought about that was, and there's different opinions on this, but that's why we had the checklist. So we had a flow where you could step by step, we'd say, click here and now click here and now click here. But if you exited out of that, we considered how else can we make sure that you're able to get the information you need if at any point you're stuck trying to figure this out yourself. So taking advantage of empty states within an app. So for example, if you log into SimpleTexting and you'd go to campaigns, which is our feature for sending out text to large groups. If you hadn't created a campaign, there could be a screen that just says, you have not created a campaign, period. We could either do that, or we can show you a screen where it's, you have not created a campaign. Here's how other customers are using campaigns. Here's a video on how to send a campaign when you're ready. And that way it's not, sometimes people feel like a guided tour is getting in the way of them using the product. And so they need a slightly more passive approach where it's, I want to be able to seek out the help center information at my own pace, right? Don't hold my hand the whole way. Another piece is the checklist. So having like here's the top 4 things that you should do as a user. And then if there's anything you can do where you're working with the product team so that when someone's first signing up, you save them a few of the steps. So I think this is going to change a lot with AI, right? Like if you go into Zapier right now, you just kind of describe the automation you want to set up and it automatically puts all of that together for you. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that complicated. A small example at SimpleTexting was that when someone would sign up for our product, they had to use their phone number for 2-factor authentication. And the first thing that someone wants to do when they're signing up for a texting product is send a text to themselves to make sure the thing actually works. So this is small. It almost sounds obvious, right? But when you first go to send a message, you would need to type in your phone number and then type in a message and then click send. We eliminated 2 of those steps. So we just used the phone number that people were putting in for 2-factor authentication. That was then automatically typed in to the phone number field. And then we typed out a generic message in the message field. So it said, I'm testing SimpleTexting to send a text to a group. So this way, then when we built that flow with app queues, we just had to send them to campaigns and then get them to hit send. And then they had that aha moment a lot faster where they see the text appear on their phone. And it's like, oh yes, this is the job I came here to do. It works. I'm ready to sign up. But otherwise we'd have to guide them through multiple fields. Click here to type in your phone number, click here to write a test message. And all of that adds, more time, more steps.
I love that you called out that example, and it just made me think of like 5 others. So I'm curious, how did you start to analyze, like what was your process with your team to start to figure out what are some additional ways we can optimize and improve this user experience over time?
We did use, I can't remember what the tool was at the time, but we used either Full Story or Hotjar, right? There's lots of tools out there that you can use to watch users. It's anyone who has watched those, you just want to yell at your screen and be like, it's so frustrating. Why aren't you clicking there? And so that was a useful tool. You watch those and you think, how could I have made this step easier? Or how could I have eliminated steps from this process?
You talked about email as well, being one of the other channels that you supported throughout this. How did you arrive at email being the best, aside from like the obvious? Was there something that you understood about just the way your users interacted with different channels that you knew this would be the best way to surround the account to have them kind of continue through that life cycle from free to purchase?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, right, is like when you think about user education, there's a lot of channels, but if you're trying to not spend a lot of money, there's kind of not that many channels, right? So like in a perfect world, we'd have a SimpleTexting Slack group where we've got a community and people are super engaged in that community and they're learning that way. Like I think about Notion and like what an enviable thing to have a community like that where your users are just teaching each other how to get the most value out of the platform. Like that's amazing. That just wasn't the state we were at. We had not built that community. So then you can explore paid channels for getting content in front of your users, but then you're spending money. So it was kind of like email was the standard. It's just you're missing an opportunity if you don't have an email drip sequence after somebody signs up. So I think it just was an assumption that we were going to use email.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. And I think that's going to resonate with our audience because so many of them are just small team marketing teams and the resources are just limited. And so it's so much better to go, as everyone's talking about, to your owned media, which email is obviously an owned media channel for you all. Then, of course, you're using your own applications. That'd be another way that you're interacting with them. What would be the future state if you had maybe more resources and more budget? How would you have wished you could, or what would be your wish list for scaling what you built?
So I feel like I've kind of hit that place in that I actually boomeranged. I left Simple Texting for a period of time and then came back, and I was really excited because there was an opportunity for me to think more creatively about how we educate our users. So a lot of times I would see the way users were using Simple Texting and I would think, man, you're using the product correctly, but you could do so much more with it if only you knew that you could connect this feature to that feature, if you integrated it this way. So we had started doing something where we cold call our users and basically offer them a free 30-minute marketing workshop one-on-one where we'd offer them advice. And this works really well for the market we're in, right? Small business owners who are wearing lots of hats, they don't have time to be thinking about just their marketing because they're having to do payroll and like run the cash register and all of these other things. So we would then record those calls, we'd turn that into a podcast, and then we would share that out by email and through like in-app communications, right? A little pop-up would come up telling you that, hey, here's a new episode with one of our users where we introduce them how to use AI to make their text better, that sort of thing.
That's a brilliant approach. I was about to ask you how you scaled that, continuing to be kind of a smaller, scrappier org, how you would scale it. And I love that you were able to scale it by sharing that to your broader audiences instead of just every single time trying to have that one-on-one conversation. Did you have any trouble getting some of those users to agree? I imagine for some companies, they're thinking like, oh, I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing and be recorded in this conversation and share it out to everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's the way you package the ask, right? I wouldn't call and say, hey, I can tell you don't know what you're doing, but it's more like, hey, I noticed you use Simple Texting. And it was still an honest ask, right? I should send you all. I can probably find like one of the cold calls that's recorded, but I'd say, hey, Taylor, I noticed you're using Simple Texting and I was wondering if you'd be open to chatting for 30 minutes. I just kind of want to learn how you're using it. And we're trying to get closer to our users. So what I'd love to do is hear about your business, hear what challenges you're facing, and see if our team can come up with any ideas to help. Best case scenario, you walk away with one or two ideas that help you out. Worst case scenario, we learned something about how our users use the platform. That's usually how I'd package that. And then the other thing you talked about scaling. The other thing that we would do is we'd, of course, have those conversations recorded. The podcast would be edited together like a narrative style podcast. But then we'd get that full discovery call with the customer. Our content team would listen to it. And then when we were doing content planning, we'd look back at those calls and say, what are some things that stood out to us what problems stood out to us that customer is currently facing? Do we think that other customers are having that same problem? And can we host a webinar specifically about that? And so having those calls would then feed these kind of customer education webinars.
It's clear from everything that you've said so far that you guys have been incredibly customer oriented and user oriented, making sure that you understand their pains, their process through using your platform and how they like to learn. You mentioned a couple of different formats of content, and I love that you took the question that direction because I was going to ask, you talked about in-app checklist, self-help support articles and videos. Did you find over time that videos were more useful or helpful for your audience, or just keeping that mix available for anyone to take the path that they want to?
That's a good question. Let me bookmark that because I want to touch something else came to mind. I want to make sure I don't lose it that I really should have touched on before, which is having a good relationship with whoever leads customer success or customer support. Lisa led the customer support team at Simple Texting, and that was invaluable because we really saw each other as partners. It was never, why the hell does the marketing site say this when our product doesn't do this, right? It was this back and forth relationship of learning, she's on the front lines talking to customers, her team's talking to customers, and they would continuously, we had a Slack channel where they would feed those insights to us so that we could improve our content and improve our onboarding. As far as what's the right type of content to help educate users, let me think about that.
Did you see success differently when you were putting a checklist or a walkthrough in the app versus like a pop-up video for a use case that they could use?
We have seen more success with, I mean, you have to have a written article on how to do something. It just kind of, you have to start there. And then the video is a cherry on top. So I do think first thing we do, have a link to a help center article where we're describing how to solve a problem step by step. If we've got the bandwidth, add a video on top of that and embed that. Checklists are good when it's like the top 3 things that you need to do to get started. Add a contact, send a message, right? Invite a friend to use the platform as well. But once you can't have a checklist with 20 items where it's, here's all of our advanced features that we want you to use. And I think that's where written and video content is useful. I will say the challenge with video content, and I have not found the solution to this, is as your platform adds more features, if there's a redesign, if things get moved around, you have to edit those videos. I'm sure that there's AI tools out there. I would, if any of you are out there, SDRs, reach out. I'm curious to see. But I haven't cracked that code yet.
I think some of what you're hitting on too is something I've run into in my career, which is actually the need for having to video script. So I'll often get back product managers that will have done their own walkthrough, and bless them. Like I understand that they're very technical in nature. And so the way they're thinking about it is less of like a storyboard and more of a click that to that, to this, to that. And there's so much you can do, even in a 30-second to 60-second explainer video of setting the stage, painting the picture for people versus just click here, click there. Did you find that that was something that with product or even with customer success that you kind of found that you have to go a little bit back and forth a little bit to help them understand the purpose of video and the importance of scripting that out?
I mean, to be honest, marketing owned that. Marketing always owned that at SimpleTexting. And I think it really had to be that way because you needed to have a little bit of a copywriter's brain of how do I make this make sense start to finish. So we had a video series that was called like SimpleTexting Academy. And it was a walkthrough of all the features, but there was a thread that went throughout all of that. That's like, imagine you're a coffee shop and you sign up for SimpleTexting. And here's how you do this. And then further on, it's like, imagine you've grown to 10 stores and you need to have all of your stores have their own account. Here's how to add multiple accounts. And so weaving that narrative throughout, it feels like a marketing skill. It's hard to hand that off to somebody else. So the key was getting input from those other teams of, hey, what features are users confused about? Where are they getting stuck? And getting that input so that those teams are happy with it and sign off on it and feel involved. But I think marketing needs to own that function.
I agree. And so much of this conversation is making me think about the struggle that I think a lot of sales-led organizations make when they're moving to a product-led growth scenario. So much of the like goals and responsibilities, who owns what, just naturally has to shift. Sales is a lot more removed from the process, and so are some other teams too. So I'd love to get your perspective on, having sat in multiple organizations in your career, what do you think are some ways people can identify how they can get up and running with switching from something like a sales-led motion to more of a product-led motion?
I think this is where you need to have a close relationship between whoever owns product onboarding, which is SimpleTexting, it was marketing, but it could be owned by the product team, and customer success. And you need to figure out what are the main things that customer success is having to do manually for customers over and over. What are they helping them with? What are they having to jump on 30-minute calls to figure out within their account? And then how do you productize that? I think that's where you unlock the product-led growth opportunity. How do you get somebody to self-serve the thing that is currently almost a solution, right? As opposed to the product. It's a manual process being done with people.
Yeah, identifying those bottlenecks and having the solution be the product.
Exactly.
I love it. What would be some of the metrics or key indicators of success that you think people can, because obviously this stuff takes time to realize and there's a lot of front load to even get something like this off the ground. But what would you say somebody who was building this out for the first time, if they were like a you, right, at your job in a SimpleTexting, what would you say to them? Like, hey, make sure you're tracking these things to prove out some initial success in the beginning.
This is one of the things I loved about SimpleTexting was that the feedback was so fast, and we were lucky to have a quite affordable product. And that made it even easier, right? Because this wasn't something where someone would have to talk to a buying committee for 6 months to determine whether they need to buy it. And so that's harder if you're working on more expensive products. So for us, we really just looked at, are people converting from trial to paid and at what rate? But then within that, we were also looking at, I think you need to think about what's the aha moment. For us, it was someone sending their first text. And so we looked at, of free trial users, how many of them are getting to the point where they're actually sending out a message. And I think tracking less, I joke that I'm a lazy marketer because I hate building out dashboards with like every single metric under the sun. But there is a piece where it's like, less is more. Just track the three most important things. Don't track something if you think about, if I have this information, will I do anything differently at my job? And if you don't know if you would, you probably don't need to spend a bunch of time tracking it.
That would be amazing if I could get that across to some people. But yeah, no, I hear you. That makes a ton of sense. And it simplifies the process too. It kind of will help you understand who needs to be in the room as well to make some of these decisions and to move fast. If you kind of already are going into this project knowing that these are the main things I'm looking to analyze. And if these don't work, then we're going to pivot to plan B.
You have to set the goal up front. We've all, I'm sure, been where we're halfway through a project and you're like, wait, what are we trying to do again?
Yeah.
What was the point of this?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Have the metric before you start doing the work.
Is there a dream scenario for you personally where you would want to be at a purely PLG motion, or do you like the hybrid? I think that's something that we're seeing a lot of these sales-led companies go to, especially in B2B SaaS. They're trying to adopt a blended model. Do you think that that can exist, especially when maybe companies are trying to sell into maybe the more SMB mid to market versus enterprise?
I think it can exist. I mean, even at SimpleTexting, we did have, I would call it sales assist, where if we saw opportunities that we thought could be bigger, then someone from sales would reach out. And we also just had sales leads come in inbound, right? They'd click our pricing page, they'd hit the largest plan and it says contact us. So the two can definitely exist together. As far as my ideal, I like sticking my nose where it doesn't belong as a marketer. And so I feel like when I don't know about something, then I try to get involved with those teams. And I enjoy the challenge of figuring out something new. So candidly, I don't have as much experience with that sales-led motion. And so it's something that I'm interested in, right? I always want to be expanding as a marketer.
I love everything that we've talked about today. Everything I'm hearing is just so customer centric and so streamlined in, yes, you're a small team. Yes, it's scrappy, but it has to be focused on the things that are actually going to drive impact. So with that being said, before we let you go, I'm curious if you have any final thoughts or a couple of hot takes regarding product-led growth or these self-serve onboarding that you've created.
I mean, my hot take, which is not that hot, but it's just talk to the customer. Like, pick up the phone and call the person, and you will learn so much. You'll even if you think the customer's wrong after you get off the call, you will learn so much. We have our own little lingo at SimpleTexting, which is OTTP, Operation Talk to the People. And so like we'd refer to it as like strategy, OTTP, what are customers saying? And I think it really changed the way that we do marketing. Like I loved starting a deck or anything with like, here's the exact quote from a customer, what they said. and tie that thread all the way to, and here's exactly why we're doing this thing.
Yes, preach that. And I would say it doesn't have to be like a particular department. I mean, I've always been flabbergasted that more marketers aren't talking to the customers. That's a great way to build your content, to help get product releases out the door, to help, I mean, win back surveys, lost surveys, like just you name it, like just whoever you are, the organization, don't be afraid. I would say just ask for forgiveness, then for permission. Just talk to your customers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is where things are different now that I'm at a large org, right? At SimpleTexting,
Mhm.
I could go through our CRM and call any customer I wanted, right? Now we've got very large household names as, I can't name them, but very large customers that it would be a little bit of an issue if I just called them directly. But if you're lucky enough to work at a SaaS company where it's okay to call a customer, you should be doing it pretty often, whether it's to get a success story, understand, product usage, figure out why somebody churned, right? Like that.
Yeah, I mean, not saying go ahead and just go pick up and dial, but maybe follow them on LinkedIn if they're active and contribute to what they're posting. It doesn't always have to be serving the brand. It can just be being subservient to their interests as well. But I think making surround sounds of people at the company that they're a customer of versus just the direct sales rep, to me, is always a win. But you're right. There has to be like an art and a technical way to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good point, right? It doesn't always have to be a phone call. It can be spending time in the same communities as them. If they're on LinkedIn, following them on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yeah, events.
Well, as Taylor said too, I actually loved how much you used the word education. And I think that that's what we should all be striving as marketers, is to be more, educating our audience more in any medium for any purpose. So kudos to you and everything you've built. You've got just an amazing resume. If our listeners wanted to get in touch with you and chat with you a little bit more, what would be the best way to do it?
Yeah, just find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Alfredo, for your hot takes. And maybe one day we'll try your hot honey too.
Thanks, Corrina. Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Direct with Corrina and Taylor.
If you enjoyed what you heard in today's episode, please give us a follow, maybe even a 5-star review, wherever you listen to your podcast.
And if you know someone that you'd like to spotlight, if you want to share your own story, visit us at motionagency.io/direct. We'd love to hear from you.